All right, we'll call this meeting open at 8:15, or should I say 8:16? I'm sorry. Let's go on to the adoption of the agenda. I move that the agenda be adopted as presented, seconded by Councillor Chouanière. I'd like to add something onto the agenda. Item 10.1, parking on Laurier Street. Fine. Parking on Laurier Street. Fine. I'd also have one item to add, Mr. Mayor, also, if I may. Fine. You might be just too late. No, no, that's fine. I think I'm on time. 10.2, to verify speed limits outside of villages proper. And seconded by Councillor Guillemot, of course. Yes. That's also one of the subjects you'd like to tackle, isn't it, Councillor Guillemot? All those in favor? Carried then. Let's go on now to disclosures of pecuniary interests. None. Delegations and presentations. There are none. Notices of motion. None. Question period. If you have any questions of council, step up to the mic. Good evening. Lise Saumur, 3584 Drouin Road. I'm here tonight because I'd like to make you aware that I submitted affidavits. You've all had occasion to read them, I believe, concerning the legal status I have with regard to my camping ground in Cheney. As Mr. Lemay had stated, the municipality had omitted to include my camping ground when came time to implement the bylaw, but my property had been purchased and held by myself prior to the implementation of the bylaw, so I have a legal non-conforming status. This was also borne out by Mr. Richard Lalonde, who was mayor at that time, and I'd asked the municipality to reimburse me the costs that I'd incurred in redressing this situation. We should not be held liable for those costs because of the fact that we hold a grandfather clause, or the beneficiaries of a grandfather clause with regard to this situation. I'm asking the municipality to reimburse us the complete costs that we incurred in challenging the zoning change that was imposed upon us by the municipality. We had not asked for this zoning change. This will be dealt with in item 9.3. Other questions? Number 8, report. Mr. Mayor, I have something to state. My name is Claude Lemay. What's your address, Mr. Lemay? 472 Le Pago Road in Rockland. I attended town council when this occurred. Now, at that time, council had to come up with an official plan as well as a zoning bylaw, and each village had an individual that had been designated to look over the zoning provisions inherent to each properties. In Hammond I was the one designated. In Saint Pascal, it was Roger Vouellette, and so on and so forth. Now, there were omissions that did occur, I admit. We had occasion to correct some of those, but we did not charge anything to residents for those mistakes we'd made. That's why I had occasion to sign an affidavit for for Mrs. Saumur, I apologize, who was then secretary for Ms. Paula Astley and Mr. Michel Hull. I knew Lise for quite a while, and I attended her camping ground much before the zoning bylaw had been ratified. Let's go on now to the report from the United Counties of Prescott-Russell. We learned today that the tourist company will supply the radio and dispatch equipment. Had been purchased by an American company. What's the name again? Mircomness. And it's a good thing because the product that they'll supply to us are made by Motorola. Many of those fire stations do work under the Motorola banner. Other companies, I believe, would have supplied us with Chinese made products. The product, of course, would have cost us a bit more. So we're obtaining the product at the same price as was agreed upon in the past. I read that somewhere around Wendover, the speed limit will revert back to 70 kilometers an hour, and there will be a set of traffic lights put up. Well, Alfred and Plantagenet or Wendover has requested that the limit be lowered along Highway 17. Well, I believe that the United Counties had talked about that. Well, nothing was mentioned with regard to that. I know also that there'll be some changes in Chennai. They want to have access from Russell Road to Drouin and to have access to the RV trail, that is should I say, the all-terrain vehicle trail that winds down there. Mr. Prévost wanted this to go down Drouin, turn around Saint Felix, and to connect onto County Road 8. I said that I would not be in agreement with that. I was in agreement that they continue on straight towards Drouin, that would connect directly onto the all-terrain vehicle trail. If we're traveling straight down on Drouin Street, there'll be much less households that would be disturbed by the comings and goings of those vehicles. Are we talking? Well, we're talking about rentals. There's a store there that rents out some equipment there, but they'll be operating during normal business hours. Let's go on now to committee reports. 9.1, asset plan. Mrs. Simard. Yes, Mr. Mayor, whereas Council has approved an asset management strategy further detailed in its corporate asset management plan, INF 2017-044, and whereas a primary principle of asset management includes a sustainable funding model, and whereas municipalities have few options in addressing the financing of capital assets, and whereas the city's existing contribution to the fleet reserve is $260,000, be it resolved that the contribution to the flight, should I say to the fleet reserve, be increased annually over the next 5 years by $50,000 to ensure the cost effectiveness and sustainability of the city's assets. Be it for the resolve that Council endorse option 1 of the financing section of this report, that the city build its vehicle reserve contribution over the next few years with the goal of financing vehicles with 20-year or less useful life from reserves and those greater than 20 years using debt. Seconded by Councillor Chouanière. Questions? Well, not a question, rather concerns. When I took a look at the map that appears before us, there's close to $2 million worth of vehicles that have gone over and beyond their lifespan. We're talking to -2, -4, -7 years, so we're in the negative column, and that gives me a cause for concern. Even with $50,000 set aside per year for that purpose, I don't think we'd manage to finance and replace the existing fleet. If the need continues to grow, I don't know how we'll be able to replace those particular vehicles. Mr. Kehoe. Well, Mr. Mayor, the councillor is right. Councillor Chouanière is right. I would like this amount be increased to $200,000 and $250,000, but I know there are other budgetary pressures that are exerted upon the township at present. It's not easy to do so within the span of 1 year. There are approximately 14 of the vehicles out of the 48 that we do have that have gone over and beyond their useful lifespan. So what we want to do at present, our contribution each and every year, is $260,000. Now we wish to increase this to about approximately $500,000. It'll take us about 4 to 5 years before reaching that limit. Now, when we do reach that point, we'll be in a situation whereby a vehicle that has less than 20 years of age or use will be paying cash, or those who have a life expectancy over and beyond 20 years, especially those fire trucks, for example, will be called upon to borrow, to purchase those vehicles. We're still not at that point yet, Mr. Mayor, but these particular policies that the City of Clarence and Rockland need to implement in the future, well, starting as of today, will be part and parcel of our assets. We're not talking about vehicle related assets, but there are also other assets that will be called upon to put in more money in to be able to pay cash for and not be compelled to uh, augment the debt. Yet, but when we're talking about $25,000, we're talking about smaller trucks, even $35,000, $40,000, or even $50,000. $50,000 even will be put onto the debt. Debt? No. Those who have run over and beyond the 20-year lifespan, our future policy will compel us to pay cash. We're not there yet. It's going to take years for us to do so. But those vehicles that have a life expectancy of more than 20 years will assume the debt for example, fire trucks. So this is not based on the amounts. Now, there were two options on the report, in the report, and I chose the useful life option presented to us. Councillor Guillemot, two comments. Firstly, I think it's an extraordinary idea. It's nice to have a plan because when we sat initially at the council table, we had a lot of vehicles that needed to be replaced, and we placed quite a lot of those 4 years. So you want us to do 50,000 a year for the first year, $100,000 next year, and $200,000 next year. So it's going to be an initial $50,000 cash outlay, and then a suggestion of a higher amount, right up to a limit of $500,000 within the next 5 years. That's quite a sizable budgetary pressure exerted on our budget. Well, if we're talking about $250,000, now we're in a lame duck situation. I don't believe that we can ask the next council to be seized by this. Well, this is a consideration. It's a consideration, but we're not responsible for preparing their 2019 budget. It's not $50,000 the first year for all years. 50,000, 150,000, $200,000. Well, Mr. Lalonde, we're in the midst of a committee of the whole meeting right now. Well, I don't know why we'd be called upon to vote on something that we can't implement at present. We cannot implement it. And the same principle applies with what we've done with the roads and sewers. The same thing applies to the Clark Road situation. This is a suggestion made to future town councils. Take a look, Mr. Lalonde, at what's written up on top. Recommendation and nothing more. All those in favor? Carried then. Thank you. Let's go on to item 9.2, encroachment. Mrs. Chouanière. That's Ruisseau Street, is it not? I only have this in English. I have this in French, but my resolution is written out in English. I see. Whereas the committee received the 7th of May last a letter from Mr. Shah Taifag concerning solar panels on a municipal property, and whereas Committee of the Whole mandated the administration to seek legal advice to propose a solution to Mr. Taifat, and whereas the town's insurer and town council suggested a solution that is replete with many provisos, be it recommended that this be withdrawn from the city proper, as recommended in the report. Seconded by Councillor Levert. Questions? Well, mostly a comment more than anything else. I do understand that some individuals within the municipality like to hide a few things. I don't know if that was the case. I don't know Mr. Taifat all that much. I believe they had occasion to sell their homes, but to ask new owners that are called upon to spend thousands of dollars to withdraw solar panels from where they are anchored presently is certainly not fair. If I was to purchase a home thinking that those solar panels on my property belong to me and learning after that that I have to take them away, this These solar panels are attached directly to the hydro lines leading onto the house. Councillor Zant, if I was a new owner, this would be a hidden vice, basically, so I would have legal recourse. The previous owner might be called upon to pay for this, even with compensation attached to the request. If we are to take note of the amount of things that were done within the city of Clarence and Rockland in the past that were improperly done, we'd be quite astounded. But I don't believe that this is not our difficulty. This is not our problem. We're not just talking about one solar panel. We're talking about many solar panels that are affixed to his property close to where the creek bed is. All those in favor then? Carried then. Thank you. Let's go on to the next item. Item 9.3, request for a complete reimbursement of application fees for a zoning bylaw amendment and site approval. Mr. Levert, the Committee of the Whole recommends that Municipal Council refuse the request for a complete reimbursement of application fees for a zoning bylaw amendment and site plan approval for the amount of $4,790 made by Mrs. Lise Saumur, Mr. Sylvain Drouin, and Mrs. Nathalie Drouin. Do I have someone to second this motion? I'll second this. Yes. Mrs. Simard, comments or questions? Councillor Levert, as Mrs. Saumur had mentioned earlier on when she appeared before Town Council, we did receive a letter from Mr. François Ledoisette, who was the urban planner at that time, and that was, and Mr. Richard Lalonde, of course, bore the truth to that out, that the zoning was non-conforming. Mr. Claude Lemay received a letter, as well as Mrs. Guindon had started up her camping activities in 1972. Now, at that time, there were no official plans that had been implemented or voted upon, and then I believe that efforts were made. Everything's does now conform with what needs to be conformed with. Money where it was spent, departments performed their work done. I know it's not an argument, but it's not the family's fault if things were not done properly at that time. This might have been a mistake or something that the municipality forgot to look into at that time. So, this being said, I'm entirely in agreement that we reimburse the lady for the fees that she incurred. Now, also, there were no documents that allowed us to take a look back at what happened. Mrs. Chouanière had stated there was a fire that did occur. Is that not right, Mrs. Saumur? I asked her to obtain a letter of affidavit from Mr. Lemay, who was mayor at that time. Mr. Lemay told us then that it had been voted upon. There was no reason to seek a zoning change. So at that time, it was not necessary for the camping grounds people to ask for a permit. Well, at that time, the camping business did not exist. Now, we should have been added onto the zoning overview at that time when it was performed, but it was never done. So we should not be held liable for mistakes at that time. So whenever we encounter similar type situations, there were no bylaws that managed this situation. Now all of a sudden we're told that there is a bylaw that manages this situation. When this is the case, they have to submit to directives as prescribed. Well, it depends in which circumstances those things occur. Now, given the circumstances, you need a permit to operate a camping ground. Now, whether there was a zoning that was done or not or overseen does not impact the situation at all. But all of the documents have been submitted. But you do have documents proving that this existed for quite a while. No. Through the review of the site plan at that time, we looked at the costs involved. I understand. You do have documents before you, but at that time, this did not even exist. We didn't even have to have recourse to a change of in the bylaw or a site plan. That was much before the amalgamation of both municipalities. Councillor Zant, Councillor Zant. Well, you see, in 1980 and 1982, we were told that this was an omission. And also, when I had occasion to have the situation revised, again, it was corrected. Councillor Zant. I'd like to know if we know now tonight what we do know. Why did the administration continue to ask for further fees, knowing there were no documents or nothing else? Why did we have to go through all of this exercise and come back to council and say, well, look, well, it was to make it, to have it conform to the regulations. I know, but how can you make things conform when you don't have documents? Mr. Leonard, Mr. Mayor, we're dealing here with a non-permitted use, and to permit that use, they have to be compliant with zoning provisions. We have to apply the conditions that were set out in the bylaw and the fees also, the fee schedule. The decision behooves town council to do so. Well, I second Mr. Levair's motion. Hold on, Mrs. Chouanière. That's the question I asked earlier on. If at that time there were no bylaws, why are we asking them to be compliant now? Well, now we have to make them legal in brackets here. So it's a protection for them. They were legal but non-conforming. But why do we have to do that? Are there safety regulations that compel them to do so? There are some changes we have no choice in implementing. Well, non-compliant use, for example, is tantamount to a building being close to the property or something like that. You know, if it's non-compliant, we'll give them the right to remain at that site. But when we're dealing with use, now to implement the use or to make use of a property for a given purpose, then we need to give them permission. They need to come up with a site plan, you see. Well, if we require that they come up with a site plan, they still we still benefited by the fact that they are now compliant. If they want to sell off one day, they can do so because now it's compliant. And compliant. Isn't there a way to separate at least or to split the fees? Because now they are compliant. They went through the situation. It's an advantage for them also. Mr. Levair has come up with a motion. Let's have Mr. Levair read the motion. If it's not seconded, then we'll revisit the initial motion. We might vote to defeat the initial one. So I'm going to ask of the council, who's in favor of this resolution? No one is? The one that is before us at present. Just to refuse it, Mr. Mayor? Yes, no one is in favor. Let's go on, Mr. Levair, with your resolution. Well, I myself, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that all fees be removed and that the money be handed back to Mrs. Saumur. And we ask Mrs. Saumur then to sign the agreement. I believe that the agreement was never signed before today, was it? No. Before reimbursing the fees that she's seeking to have reimbursed. Do I have someone to second Mr. Zant's resolution? No. All those in favor of this particular resolution, who's in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 then. So fine. Carried then. Thank you. Parking along the Village Morris site. Councillor Zant or Councillor Grimard, I'm sorry. The report number LOI 1004 being a report regarding the addition of a parking lot in the future Morris Village Park site be received as information. Seconded by Councillor Zant. Any questions? Mr. Boucher, I understand the legal notice that was sent and all of this and all of that, but I do understand that if something was to happen in this park, even if we're told that its work is not completed in the park yet, we'd be liable before the courts. It would be important to put up signage at the top of the hill stating use it at your own risk until it's open. Well, Mr. Mayor, if I'm allowed to answer, yes, it's not a legal opinion, but it's an opinion that stems from insurers, and what you've mentioned will be done. Yes, but I'm just awaiting a directive from council before going ahead because I've only been asked to look into the possibility of putting in a parking lot facility. When I received this request, I asked our insurers what liability we were open to before officially opening up that site, and this is what they answered me. But any park really that is not deemed to be open ought to have this signage regardless. If there is a parking lot facility and if people make use of this parking lot facility, we should put up a signage saying use it at your own risk. But it wouldn't be our fault. Yes, but it's a town-owned property and we're still held liable, be it open or not. Well, of course, if we put up signage saying park at your own risk, well, then that's fine. It's important to have this done. So, even though, Mr. Mayor, we do have a parking lot facility or not, unfortunately, Mrs. Chouanière, Mr. Grimard had his hand up beforehand. And Mrs. Chouanière, I believe it's important within the confines of a municipality to have an area where people can slide down a particular hill, so certainly during the winter time. But there's no obstacle that prevents people from parking, and even then, if people get hurt, as things stand right now, the site is not ready. I'm not talking about at present, but if ever we wanted to make things official, as we're all saying at present, in the city of Ottawa, there are some areas where things are maintained and these sites are supervised between such a time and such a time. Mr. Zant, Mr. Grimard had stepped in before I did. He'd lost, yes. My youngster makes use of this hill to slide down. That's the only one available in town. And often when I picked him up, there were some that were sliding down towards where Saint Jean is. I don't know how we can go about correcting the situation or improving the situation, but I'm just leaving this in your able hands. But just be conscious of the facts that there are some people that make use of the sliding premises there, but in the wrong direction. Mr. Grimard, well, we'll still put up signage. We'll still have security problems for those individuals that park here, there, and everywhere to have their children slide down in spite of the signage put up. We have a plan with regard to the park. We're going to have a parking lot facility, and if we were to remove a bit of grass and put in a bit more gravel, that will slow down people when they go down the bottom of the hill, especially during that time, but during the winter time. But if we put up signage, and if there's an accident concerning safety of pedestrians or not, we'll still wind up in litigation before. But in any event, if we encourage them to go to the park and we put down gravel, that's another matter. Now, as far as the parking lot facility is concerned, am I right here, Mr. Boucher? You're entirely right. We're facilitating. Let's wait a year, Mr. Grimard. Oh, no, it's not a question of waiting, but it's logic dictates. I know what you mean, Mr. Boucher. I might reassure council of the following. We're going to put a lot of emphasis on the park being open and put up the signage, and we'll refer the matter back to our insurers if need be. Thank you. All those in favor? Carried then. Let's go on now to a grader contract along with an operator, Mrs. Chouanière. Whereas the rental of a grader with an operator is required in order to properly clear the snow and the spring maintenance to adequately maintain the gravel roads in the rural sector of the municipality in order to reach an acceptable level of roads. Be it resolved that Council adopt a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the city clerk to sign a one-year contract with the Ghislain Lalonde Enterprise for the rental of a grader, including one operator to clear snow from gravel roads in the rural area of the municipality and the spring maintenance of these roads for $186.95 per hour. Be it also further resolved that the contractor be paid $110 per day in waiting time when the equipment is not in use, and be it further resolved that a minimum of 250 hours for the winter season be paid to the contractor for the duration of the contract as recommended in the report INF 2018 043. Seconded by Councillor Grimard. Questions? Mr. Lalonde, two questions here, Mr. Mayor. The cost per day has nearly doubled. Is this the norm that prevails across the industry right now, this $110 amount per day? Well, I cannot say if this is the standardized practice but throughout the industry, but I know it's very hard to get someone that would be available to do what needs to be done. It's hard to tap into resources of those people available to do the work that needs to be done. So we're called upon to pay for the waiting costs, basically. Just to specify this even further, Loisel, that clears the snow along 417, is paid $60 per day. He doesn't supply a truck, he just drives and is waiting. I believe that it was $75 for standing time in Ottawa. That applies to the operator and the machinery. Well, Loisel, that applies only to the employee. Second question here, Mr. Mayor, but that's before your time, Julien. But two directors prior to when you took the helm told us the following. We want to not get rid of, but we don't want to contend with this type of agreement anymore. So we purchased a newer grader to be able to compensate this particular type of situation. So we've purchased a grader and we're continuing with the same setup that prevailed beforehand. So I'm just trying to understand what would be the best alternative for the department because of the fact, well, from year to year now, we have fewer and fewer kilometers to deal with because we're applying more surface treatment. Where are we going? Because we were going one way and then we're going into another way. And I'm just trying to see what's what. Well, Mr. Mayor, to answer the question asked by Councillor Lalonde, since that particular year, we've always entered into a contract with a grader. We entered into a 3-year contract. This year, we entered into a 1-year contract and completely do away with this additional grader. As things stand right now, we need a third grader. The rental cost, of course, is much lower than the cost of purchasing such a vehicle, which would be quite considerable. So that's why we're entering into a 1-year contract at present. Councillor Lalonde, I'm taking a look, Mr. Mayor. The standby time represents 83% worth of increase. If I take a look at the 3 previous years of operation, 83% worth of increase. And the price per hour has increased by 12.76%. I'm taking a look at the amount of money that we'd like to add to our budget, and it's impossible to contend with this amount. We're told that we're always taking a minimum of hours per season, 250 hours, and for the past 5 years, we've always required 340 or above that hours, and we're proposing to increase that by some 83%. I don't know of any companies that had similar increases, that heaped similar increases upon the municipality's shoulders. Mr. Levert, to follow up with what Mr. Levert has said, it would be worth taking a look at what Ottawa pays for waiting time. Mr. Leonard? Sir, last year we entered into a 3-year contract with the same company, and we went back to tender, and he's the only guy that tendered again this year. He's the only one in our area that can guarantee an operator that is on standby. So that's the cost that's associated with this. Our option would be to purchase a grader and to come up with an additional employer to operate the said grader. We do this for 1 year, and we think that at the end of this year we'll be able to completely eliminate uh, this third grader. Is it that we went to tender much too late in the year and all other companies are tapped to the maximum? No. It's because of the highway that people make use of for the smallest type of errand, and there aren't all that many grader operators that are available. Well, if we compare to municipalities east of here, well, we're all basically in the same boat. Councillor Chouanière, municipalities within Prescott Russell encountered the same problem. It's even harder to contend with graders, but grader operators or snowplow operators are hard to come by. So we have to increase budgets to pave our roadways when we won't be need any graders anymore in the future. Well, that's life seen through pink lenses, Mrs. Chouanière. I see. Councillor Levert. I believe, Mr. Mayor, that even though we're entering into a 1 year contract, we'll be able to assess the likelihood or the necessity of a third grader. The graders are sought after, especially by the city of Ottawa. I believe there's an individual that supplies at least 20 or so graders to the city of Ottawa to remove snow from their streets. I believe we're getting proper service. We're offering this service, and at present we're offering a good service, globally a good service. And most of our roads are cleaned up before Ottawa's roads are being cleaned up. We might inform ourselves as to what Ottawa charges or pays, just to compare. Well, I can tell you they pay a bit higher. It was just for comparison's sake. But he's the only person that tendered this year. Mr. Mayor, when we go to tender and we have no choice but to go with one in particular, do you ask to obtain prices for 1, 2, or 3 years to determine whether there's savings to be realized? Well, we might enter into a 2 year contract with a 1 year extension clause, but really we're at the limit. And as far as greater resources go, we identify this as a budgetary pressure, of course, but we'll see what happens. Well, we'll save in the long run. This is a contract that dates back to November 1st and running on to the 15th of May. We'll run up to the month of June. Fine. All those in favor? Carried then, thank you. Item 9.6. Councillor Lalonde. Yes. Whereas the 2018 capital budget for the purchase and installation of the rink boards at Hammond Park and La Violette Park is $60,000. And whereas the bids for the purchase and installation of the ice rink boards are much higher than anticipated due to the substantial increase in metal prices, and be it resolved then that the City Council authorized the transfer of $25,000 from the Parc in Lieu deferred revenue to the Hammond and La Violette Park Rink Board purchase and installation budget, and be it resolved that Municipal Council awards the Hammond and La Violette Park Rink Board purchase and installation contract to Permafib Incorporated for an amount of $80,623.64 and plus HST as recommended. So we're talking about an increase of some $20,000. We're all in agreement with this? Yes. A question here, Mr. Mayor. I recall that I was in favor of tapping into the money that was budgeted for Richelieu Park to take care of the Hammond situation. But having visited the Hammond venue, I noticed that the Hammond was in need of rink boards. But I would like us to paint those two rink boards that we added on to Richelieu Park. The rest of the skating rink is painted, but those 2x8 boards that were installed don't are not very eye appealing. You're going to paint those yourself, Mr. Boucher, are you? Are you? No, thank you, Mr. Mayor, but I don't think so. Not myself, but someone else, of course, who can do so. All those in favor? Carried, then. Thank you. Other item, parking on Laurier. Mrs. Sima. Mrs. Sima? Fine. Fine. Boy, I just. Whoa. Is she with us or not with us? All right. In front of the Joyeux Cafe, there's no parking available. Some residents complained. Well, there are some no parking signs that have been put up right in front of both of the businesses there. There's Café Joyeux, and there's another business right by. That's at the corner, close to where the street light is. Yes. They can park in front of the town hall. No, because there are no parking signs put up all along Laurier Street. So I wanted to proceed the way we did with the gentleman on Edward Street. A 15-minute maximum parking. Well, if it would, I would be completely in agreement to implement that. If we were to create diagonal parking spaces along then, if there were no diagonal parking spaces available, and at the back also they can park behind the National Bank. I know there is some behind the National Park, but you have National Bank, but you have to drive there. Let me tell you, those people who wish to make a turn, well, there aren't all that many people that make a right-hand turn because you're stuck really when you're caught in a parking position on the roadway, wish to turn. But the parking facility is there. I said that I was going to bring it to your attention. Item 10.2, Councillor Chouanière, a notice of motion, whereas the limit had been limited to 50 kilometers an hour in the city, including rural areas. Be it resolved that the city look into which provincial law limits the speed limit at 50 kilometers an hour, and that a copy of this act be handed to all members of town council. And I'd like to add that the city compare the rural areas and with everything else along Prescott Russell. Mr. Wilson, that's going to be your baby. Well, if we're looking into county procedure, we have no jurisdiction over that. Well, most of the roadways, most of the entranceways, all of the homes are far away from the roadway there. But let me have an argument. Let me make this argument. When folks say that when children wait for the bus, they're waiting for it on the side of the road, and if cars go by at a high speed, well, they don't. These children don't have to wait on the side of the road for the school bus to go by. But when I was younger, I was told, just if you want to play around in your backyard, but not in the middle of the road. You have to say to the children that they should not wait for the school bus at the edge of the roadway. We'd have to look into this. I was told that if the law that prevailed, if there was no signage that was put up, the provisions that did prevail was 50 kilometers an hour. Some police officers told me that we were going against the law, against the spirit of the law. That's why we'll look into this. Mr. Wilson, it's all yours. Wonderful, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thank you. All right. All those in favor? Seconded by Councillor Zant. Yes. Yes. It's a notice of motion. Well, fine. We don't need to second this. Fine. That's it. Any announcements? That's it. That takes care of what we needed to take care of, right? Any questions? Questions to department heads? Well, I had a question. Those individuals from Saint Philippe were quite happy where paving was done from Drouin right up to the top of the hill, those few kilometers that need to be paved. Unfortunately, the speed is not controlled and people are driving too quickly. There are a lot of deers crossing the roadway at that point in time. They cross the roadway and eat wild berries or roots down there. I don't know who needs to put up deer crossing signage or Do you want to reduce the deer speed limit or the car speed limit? Well, I don't know if somebody wishes to look into this. Well, especially the speed, the speed of the deer traveling by. Yes, the speed of the deer. Yes, yes. I believe that we're aware of the situation. There is, they call that stretch of roadway the corridor, basically, and this should be looked into and protected. If you can send me the address by email, or should I say, of those individuals that did complain. Any other questions? Councillor Chouanière, Lavergne Road, the people there are quite happy, but there are some areas in front of individual entrances. It seems as if there's a dip in the road where the gravel had been spread, but it just basically caved in some areas. Before and after, some entrances, the gravel level has leveled off, if you wish, but there are 2 or 3 residents that have some areas in which the gravel caved in on the east side. Do you have any particular addresses? If not, I'll ask that we take a proper look. Other questions? I do have 4 questions. Oh, 4 questions. I see. Wow. I thought the first one.
The fire that we had on Albert Street. At one time, we used to have standby firemen that would stay there a couple of hours after a fire. Did we have someone that stayed there because the fire started back about 6 hours after? 5 hours, I would say.
Through the mayor, we did not have any firefighters stay at the property. The property was checked with thermal imaging cameras to ensure that the fire was out. The property was signed back over to the property owner to look after the property at our departure on Monday evening. The property owner, through their insurance company, had a company there to secure the property. I spoke with them today. There was no signs that there was anything wrong with the property at that point in time. 6.5 hours later, there was a second call to that property. That call is still under investigation at this time.
And it burned down completely. So we did not, but is that a procedure that we have? Someone would stay there as a standby in case something happened later, a couple of hours after?
Through the mayor, that has been done by fire departments in the past. I wouldn't say that that's always the case. It largely depends on the case at hand. We've been to a number of structure fires. We don't leave firefighters there to sit and monitor the property for an indefinite period of time. We obviously, if there's concerns about whether or not the fire is still out, we're going to stay and continue to fight the fire.
In other words, proper procedures were carried out.
Yeah. We checked the property thoroughly prior to leaving on Monday, October 1st. We believed that the fire was out. It was turned back over to the property owner. The property owner had another company there securing the property, boarding it up that night. Spoken to them, they saw nothing unusual.
Okay, my other point was you were aware that a lot of municipality had concern about the volunteer firefighters certification program. That has been lifted now. Now that the regular one that we had there, they don't have to take the course, but any new hiring, they have to have the certification program. That just came out today from Toronto for me.
Through the mayor to the councillor's question, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what's happening with mandatory certification of firefighters in the province. The previous provincial government had implemented mandatory certification for a number of firefighter and fire officer positions, which we were working hard to try and figure out how we were going to address. The current provincial government has rescinded that as of earlier this month and removed the firefighter certification requirements. The last correspondence I received from the minister through the fire marshal's office was that they were going to work with fire departments to still work towards that, but there was no definitive answer as to when or what that would look like. We have a meeting with regional fire chiefs later this month to discuss that very topic. I have also emailed the fire marshal directly to ask for clarification because I think there's conflicting legislation now in that the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires us to train our firefighters and requires us to train our supervisors. I believe the province has now set a standard saying you have to meet this standard. And now they've just simply said, we're not going to make you do it, but the standard's still out there. So I don't know. I've asked the fire marshal for clarification and have had no response at this time.
OK. L'autre, monsieur.
The other question I have is for Mr. Leonard, and I raised that issue on many occasions. Streetlights. I counted 16 that were burnt out, starting from the front of Town Hall right up to Guibal Street. There are 9 that are burnt out. On La Porte, there are 2 burnt out. There's 1 on Chamberlain, 2 on Saint-Jacques, 1 on Campo, 1 on Charon. And this matter has been dragging on for quite a while, since the month of February, as a matter of fact. We've never done anything. I received a call after I raised the issue from one departmental manager, but nothing was ever done. Well, Mr. Mayor, all I can do is ask that I be given the addresses so that they be put on the list of that need to be looked at. Well, when I go by there at night, I don't see addresses. What we did in the past was we put in either a pink or a yellow ribbon around those street lamps that had lights that were burnt out. You don't see those during the daytime when you go by those street lights, but only at night. I am entirely in agreement with you that you can only see if a street lamp is burnt out during the evening and not during the daytime. Or if we can pinpoint those addresses, we can add them to the list of addresses that need street lamps or lights to be replaced. All those on Laurier Street will be replaced in the next few weeks. As was mentioned previously, this operation will be conducted at the end of October. Well, Mr. Mayor, you'll recall when I raised this issue the first time around, you told us that we were going to have new lights within the next 6 weeks. But that was 4 months ago. I believe that we targeted end month of October. We were told the past 2 weeks now that Mr. Mayor, as I stated the last time around, was the process is the majority of the majority, including the city of Ottawa, which is a bigger city than city of Clarence and Rockland. They take all precautions to ensure that all street lights that are burnt out to replace the street lights. But they ask citizens to identify the addresses that have street lights that are burnt out. The addresses are then sent via work order to those people that replace street lamps. Well, our bylaw enforcement officers work until 10 p.m. They certainly can see, well, look, this is not the process that we have in place at present. Ms. Collier?
I got a copy here. Municipal government can opt out of cannabis sales in their community by January 22nd, 2019. Council will need additional information to make informed. I see that a lot of municipalities are pressing bylaw at the present time. Either they choose themselves. One municipality that I saw last week, they says if it doesn't go to LCBO, we don't want any locally.
So at this time, I'm meeting with the city's solicitors next week to get as much information as possible, and we will be bringing a report to the new council after the election.
Can we bring that at the next plenary session? No?
For discussion.
For discussion.
I believe I've done enough research at this point to bring you something, yes.
Very good, thank you.
I don't know if Ottawa or Toronto, when you have let's say a street light that's burnt out in front of a particular property, all you needed to do was go onto the municipality's site, indicate the address where the light was burnt out, and it was sent off automatically to town administration at all. So as soon as a light was burnt out, folks are aware of their address and they just post it on the town's website. He says that we need to phone up client services. Well, Mr. Mayor, it could be through Facebook. It could be done through Facebook, through our website, where people that are registered can issue comments or make comments. And we have a town employee that reviews all comments made with regard to the city of Clarence and Rockland. There are many ways of being told where burnt out streetlights are located at. Well, how can we inform people when lights are burnt out? Can play an important part in making the town aware of where those are. Well, the only thing we can do right now is to try to identify those addresses that need burnt the new lights. And well, if we were to ask citizens at large to take part in such a campaign, they'd certainly be willing participants. Adjournment called at 9:10 p.m. Then thank you, everyone. Good evening, and don't forget to vote, please.